Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news for Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. Let's see, I guess, I hope everything's set up right as it is. Yeah, we're not streaming to Twitch anymore, so as soon as this kicks in, we'll see if we're having any real network issues. As far as the catch-up section, managed to play a little bit more of Punch Club, so I've gotten into at least the second act, a clear point which would be an act change, certainly has happened, but in that it has sent me to Russia, and in this Russia sequence you can do nothing except for work out and improve your stats, probably at a slightly higher rate, and then take on fights. And if you fail the fights, well then obviously you need to work out and improve your stats some more. And that's it. Like, there you can eat and sleep too, and you have to keep your energy up. But it eliminates several of the micromanaging elements. I don't even know why I'm clicking on Yu-Gi-Oh stuff anymore. That were previously in Punch Club, such as having to actually buy food for yourself and work jobs to be able to afford it. It also eliminates any side things you can do to get skill points to unlock any new skills. There's just no extra fights at all. The whole game seems to hit a peak near the end of the first act, which is a fairly long part of the game. It took me nearly 300 in-game days, almost a year, to get past that first act. But near the end, even before then, it starts to just reduce and eliminate your possibilities of the actual boxing matches in a boxing manager game down to almost zero, and thus you can't get skill points because there's no other way to get skill points. Thus you can't unlock new abilities, which might change the game drastically, just unlocking one ability. Although unlocking the wrong ability definitely also seems to me to be a way of causing you great misery. I'm noticing, perhaps with the Steam Next Fest, that there are some demos showing up in the top 100 today on SteamDB. Top 100 24-hour concurrent player base, and it might in part also just seeing a little bit of a change here. Fragpunk playtest. So I guess it's an interesting question I have to ask myself. I had thought I was going to reset my chart on like January 1st. And it still probably makes a lot of sense. This Goose Goose Duck game, again, looks like brand new. But in reality, it might make a lot more sense to reset the chart somewhere in September, when you start to see games come out. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is in the 23rd spot. I heard a story that a lot of employees have not been assigned a new project in Japan after the release of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, with that being the implication that they have been left by Bandai Namco to go out of their minds sitting around doing nothing until they feel so much Japanese shame that they'll quit the job. That way Bandai Namco can claim they have never fired anybody, or they didn't fire anybody. Even that is far too prevalent, and that's a great example of where there ought to be a law that if you haven't been assigned work in a certain amount of time, you can file for unemployment. In the United States, if you are a project worker or a temporary worker. Temporary worker in particular is weird because technically you are an employee of the temp agency, but if they don't assign you a new job within, I think it's like 2 weeks, which is kind of a long time, then you can file with unemployment and say that the temp agency fired you. It complicates the whole idea, certainly. And while there might be even legal protections in Japan like that, they probably aren't used much or known much. But to be a salaried employee and to be getting paid but being given nothing to do is a weird scenario that unfortunately too many Japanese people seem to suffer with, although I imagine there's many people who would think that that's a great scenario. And it would be a great scenario. Like 2-3 years I could see sitting around doing nothing, showing up in an office, or working remotely would even be nicer, and taking a salary. But the isolation of it needs to be considered, and the need of the human being to feel a sense of satisfaction in everything that they are spending their time on needs to be addressed too. And I imagine nowadays younger people could handle it a lot better. Like if I personally had a job where I was just sitting in a room doing nothing all day, or doing pathetic things, I would just start a YouTube channel like I am. I'd just start streaming and stuff, and you have that potential capability, assuming somebody's not looking over your shoulder going, no, you have to sit there in silence and do nothing. At a certain point though, it is just getting dangerously close to solitary confinement, and the science has shown that there's major mental damage done to people in solitary confinement, even for fairly short periods of time, and just, you know, social ostracization. But yeah, that there ought to be a law in general in which you could sue a company and say, hey, you've drastically reduced my role or drastically changed my role, that which is another thing in the United States that doesn't seem to really exist in Japan, as far as if somebody drastically changes your role, you've been effectively fired from the job you were hired from and transferred or rehired to another job, that you were not given an offer to whether you wanted to be transferred or rehired at that different job. If you were hired to be a manager and then they made you a janitor, that's not acceptable. You should be given the choice to say, hey, no, I didn't accept a job to be a janitor, I accepted the job to be a manager. But I guess that's one of probably thousands of things that the Japanese society needs to try and address, and is perhaps failing to address fast enough. Liar's Bar here looks like it's some highly animated, animalistic, anthropomorphic characters playing Liar's Dice, which that's a lot of animation for Liar's Dice, which is a pretty simple game. But yeah, we've got, even in the 15th spot, a new game that seems to have shown up. Perhaps that it's just the time of season, perhaps it's also the numbers overall. I'm not sure. I also saw a mod for a polyamory mod for Baldur's Gate, in which you can romance multiple characters without them getting jealous. Which is interesting, to change a game that much when it was clearly designed in a certain way. So while we did see big new numbers, new games there. My chart, which is taking the long view of it, is still going to stay just about the same, which inherently highlights why both charts should be shown and why my chart is more of an afterthought as far as here's the trend that we're maintaining. Banana has been a long-running success. Counter-Strike 2 will always be a long-running success. If I don't ever start to block some of the games like Counter-Strike 2, though, you will also just have games that were played for years and years and years always be at the top of this chart, which would be helpful if I was trying to find a chart that showed me the most played games of all time, but it stops being relevant at a certain point if, let's say, Half-Life 1 was played for 10 years straight at very high numbers, but that was 20 years ago. It's just not new news worth talking about. Now the good news, after all that bad story that I just heard, is that Dragon Ball Sparking Zero does seem to be received fairly well. So, yeah. And with a recent death of one of the announcer of Dragon Ball, the Dragon Ball anime, and the recent death of the somewhat less recent death of the creator of Dragon Ball, there's been a lot of renewed interest in Dragon Ball Z lately. It may also just be a wave, too, of people, a new generation, getting back into it, having free time to get back into Dragon Ball and be excited about it all over again. Red Dead Redemption 1 and its DLC has been announced for PC. There's also been some talk that they're waiting for kind of a generational leap in the Steam Deck, next Steam Deck to be made, which, you know, that's probably a wise move. It was a little fast in the shift between the LCD version and the OLED version, but that certainly was them stepping up and saying, hey, we're target that the LCD version of the Steam Deck, they were targeting a competitor to the Nintendo Switch, something that would have been lower powered and more cheap. The demand fairly quickly, in part because of the price of the ROG Ally and the disappointing performance of the original ROG Ally, pushed the Steam Deck to be more expensive and more powerful, and thus there was a quick pivot to the Steam Deck OLED. Now it does kind of make sense for them to wait for a generational shift of something. There are several different things that could be generational shifts. It doesn't inherently have to go from 6 nanometer to 5 or 4 nanometer circuitry, although that might be helpful, or it doesn't have to try and go from 4 nanometer even smaller, which going even smaller than 4 nanometer circuitry is getting to be almost impossible because you're breaking down the laws of physics as far as how thick the wiring can be before it just becomes quantum entanglement problems. And yeah, I'm not explaining it well, but yeah, the circuitries are getting so small that the electrons are jumping right past what are supposed to be the outer limits of where the circuit should go and hitting other circuits and causing short circuits or incorrect data noise. But yeah, there could easily be a slight generational increase in the CPU. There could be a slight generation increase in the GPU CPU, RAM, memory storage format could be an issue, certainly, too. There are possibly faster 3D Nantec storage formats that could be helpful. There could just be one thing that's technically one generation ahead, and then everything else could be slightly better. You could also say a generational leap might be moving from 1280 by 800 up to, let's say, 1460 by 900. I don't even know if that's really resolution. But yeah, if you could get just a few more pixels in it, maybe that would be helpful, although a few more pixels may not really matter that much. Like, theoretically, yes, I'd like it to have the ability to do something like 1920 by 1080, 1080p on its screen. It probably would be wider than 1980, though. It probably would throw a few hundred more pixels on either side, and then there would just be a black bar on the left and right when you're looking at 1080p resolution formats. But yeah, there's not too much else you could do. You could put Wi-Fi 7 in it. That could be the generational update, or even Wi-Fi 6 in it, and that might be a generational update, and that'd be pretty easy. You could put in a faster USB standard if something like that came out. You could put in a Bluetooth 6.0 chip in it, and that would be a generational leap. They could put in Hall effect sensors by default into the control sticks, or just in general have better understanding of making really good buttons on the sides or on the touch screen, better gyros. Yeah, you could certainly claim almost anything as a generational leap. That being said, there is the general thought and desire that the next Steam Deck is either going to be coming out and announced on Black Friday, which I think that's a little unlikely that it's going to be that early, or it's going to be out in about 6 months is when they'll announce something new. If they don't announce something new in about 6 months, then in about a year it's going to start to feel a little weird, but it wouldn't be that weird. But yeah, you are kind of wanting to expect it to improve its technology a little bit, or get a lot cheaper, which, heck, if they just didn't come out with anything new and knocked $100 off the Steam Deck, off the base price of the OLED, that would sell nicely to a lot of people too, particularly parents who would want to give a Steam Deck to each of their kids. It'll be interesting to compare what the next Nintendo console cost versus what the Steam Decks cost. I am much more interested, frankly, in seeing the improvement on the software side of the Steam Deck, because there's still a lot of room for improvement there. And if you get back to the idea of comparing it to the Switch, the Nintendo Switch actually, I don't think, has improved its software as far as its operating system at all since it launched. You can't even just plug in MP3s and videos into it, as far as I can tell, years later. And yes, there's a perhaps parental control reason why you wouldn't want to be able to just let them pass around micro SD cards with inappropriate videos and play them on their Switch. That parental control is not particularly tight since there are streaming services available and YouTube is available on the Switch, or at least it was at one time. I think it still is. So yeah, there's been a need for a lot of improvement on the Switch, and it's nowhere close to as many features as on the Steam Deck. I think there is just a focus to get the desktop mode that needs to happen. Get the desktop mode to be a better sales point and less of an afterthought. Also, the actual Steam experience of playing games on the Steam Deck, I can't even speak to because I haven't actually played any games on the Steam Deck. Yep. Getting back to games more instead of hardware, which I have talked way too much about the Steam Deck. I really bought a Steam Deck just to evangelize it and play with it very little, and I've played with it very little. This Backyard Baseball 97, which is surprisingly shown up on Steam, was actually the last of the humongous games that the ScumVM emulator couldn't emulate. So, the second that the ScumVM emulator actually could emulate this game, it shows up on Steam being sold. Which, I don't think there's anything actually too shady going on there, but it definitely does speak to, almost certainly, the latest version of ScumVM's emulator is being used to play that game. Now, a question to ask is, I've been going down the Steam front page each of these streams, and is it actually worth my time to just kind of see what the top sellers are and all of that? No, not sure. It's really hard to have enthusiasm for games that I'm not likely going to buy or play anytime soon. Alright, so let's focus in a little bit more and go through this, because I actually don't have a lot of time. So let's go through the Video Games Chronicles headlines, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the day also not making any footage. This is weird. There's all kinds of stuff here on the side. What is all this? So there's a whole thing here. Alright, while we fix that. By the way, just use uBlock Origin there. I'm hearing more and more talk of Manifest 3 on Chrome kicking in and making uBlock Origin not work, or it may even be to the point where you can't even use uBlock Origin anymore on Chrome. And I'm hearing people say, well, I'm going to have to think about stopping to use Chrome, when realistically you should have done that 4 or 5 months ago, which is exactly what I did. So one thing I can at least pat myself on the back is that I saw where this was going, and they said directly where this was going to go, and transitioned over to Firefox. Now, is it very possible that Firefox runs less smooth than Chrome? Yes. Is it terribly unacceptable? No. It works just fine. it took a lot of extra work to move over to Firefox. And Firefox isn't the greatest option as a company either, but it's really the only option I have. Could I do everything I'm doing with uBlock Origin without uBlock Origin in Firefox or Chrome? It's possible. It's possible I could block the visual elements by changing their custom CSS, but it would be a ton of extra work. And I've just, particularly in the last 12 months, I've taken on so many side projects and just like little tweaks, anything and everything just to distract me from scheduling videos for the most part, and then recording footage more recently. And I'm just not focusing, not accomplishing the important parts of being a YouTuber, which is actually getting content that releases. Anyways, I started rambling there, and the last thing I had just said is I don't have a lot of extra time. The release date for the Alan Wake 2 second expansion is leaked. The Lake House DLC launches next week, according to the retailer EB Games. Okay. I guess we'll just leave it at that. Astrobot's speedrun levels will release weekly beginning Thursday. Each level will feature 2 new cameo bots, which I guess in a way that is how Astrobot is going to maintain people talking about it, is by releasing new content, which is not a terrible thought. Let's see. So I'm noticing that there are several things here on Video Games Chronicles, and when my macro was running, it did seem to me like there was a new anti-bot "Are you human?" element being implemented, and it actually ran into the issues. It actually gave my macro some trouble for a little bit of time there, which is weird because up until this point, any kind of Cloudflare protection, "Are you a bot?" has failed to detect that my macro is running and it actually is a bot. Perhaps mostly because it is a macro that's run very minimally on one computer that is actually used by humans. The new Xbox Series X models reportedly a slight internal upgrade over the smaller, cheaper internal components over the original, with smaller, cheaper internal components found. That's not super surprising. So it's saving Microsoft, I imagine, a few bucks on selling the unit. Riot confirms that further layoffs, with 30 staff affected. The company laid off over 500 staff in January. What's crazy about games like League of Legends, I believe, is what Jinx here is from, and I would assume these other characters are also from League of Legends. I'm not sure if this one is that I know the visuals of Jinx. I've seen Jinx quite a bit, but I know nothing about her, and it would have made a lot more sense if they had made a Jinx spin-off game, which I don't believe they did. They made other spin-off games and cartoons and anime like cartoons, none of which were promoted or published enough to get in front of my eyes. Like, when I think League of Legends, I see this Jinx character, and that's all I know of the whole thing. And yeah, I can't even tell you the names of these other characters. And now they're laying off people, so I'd have to assume I'm not alone in that experience, and that there's been a very superficial level of absorption and understanding of League of Legends. Perhaps in part because League of Legends is an esports MOBA game, and MOBA games are just too demanding and too difficult for your average player to get into. There's no easy entry. And that may be the case with Deadlock too when it comes out, is that it'd be kind of tough for me to think I'd ever end up playing Deadlock as a MOBA game. It just seems like that's too much time commitment and too much effort, too much skill needed. A Monster Hunter Wilds showcase stream is coming next week, according to Video Games Chronicle. Edge Magazine veterans have launched on a printed gaming periodical, with the first volume now available. Yep. 8 different covers to choose from. Each volume is priced at £24.99. Available exclusively in the UK. But what is it, really? A printed gaming periodical. So it's a book about video games, as far as I can tell. That they're going to put out several different volumes. Which inherently seems almost contradictory that you would want to read a book about video games unless you're going to read a book about something very specific about video games. Otherwise, why aren't you just playing video games? It's hardly the case that you can write a book report in a school about video games. X-Defiant producer says there's no plans to shut down after Season 4. Mark Rubin admits player numbers have fallen, but says Ubisoft is working on a recovery plan. Nobu Uematsu says Fantasian is his final game project as a composer. The update now says the composer claims he's not retiring. Yeah. He's moved to clarify his comments and claimed he's not retiring, but stepping back from video games. Interesting. Which I guess may be the thought here. This is a perhaps too fancy way to update an article, because I could see somebody just thinking this is another paragraph as they're skimming it. I imagine it's a lot more work to compose music for video games than it is to compose music for movies or TV. And I imagine it pays a little bit less to compose music for video games than it does to compose music for TV or movies. Although I don't know what the situation really is in Japan. Black Ops 6 trailer specs, preload, and launch times have been published. Dragon Age, the Veilguard specs and absence of third-party DRM has been confirmed. BioWare also discusses a PS5 Pro enhancements and reveals preload times. It's funny now that we're getting to preload times being a sales point. I would assume what they mean by preload times is the time you can start downloading the game, not how many minutes it's going to take for a game to preload onto your hard drive, because that would be determined by your internet speed, I'm sure. October's PlayStation Plus games catalog and classic titles are now live. 18 games are also leaving PlayStation Plus's game catalog this week. PlayStation, the concert, is going to tour over 200 cities in 2025 and 2026, and it will debut in Dublin next April, playing music from several game series, of which I would say this one is still alive. It's questionable whether this series is alive, since now they're gonna think of rebooting it into a new trilogy. It's questionable whether there will be a real audience if there was a third game in this series, and it's very much unlikely that there will be a large audience if there's a third game in this series. Noticeably, Astrobot is missing from this screenshot, and there's not going to be anything new that could come out that would be added to this concert. They can't really learn new songs. It's probably also a sad statement for orchestras and bands and things, as they're getting desperate to try and find ways to fund themselves. Ticketmaster in part, and just really expensive ticket sales have ruined the concert going experience, whether it's an outdoor rock concert or a in-theater orchestra concert. In-theater orchestras in general have been severely underpaid performance actors compared to any other performance actors for decades now, and I don't see it changing at all. It really has turned an art into something you have to just either do for the love of the art or for fun as a hobby. Yeah, I guess radio killed the idea of going to a theater to listen to music. There's just not that much of a reason to do it when you can hear it on the radio or on streaming services in modern times. Moving on, Tetris Forever receives a November release date. The compilation is also coming to PC and consoles next month. It would be interesting how I would do a quick look on Tetris Forever, which is pretty much all I would do with a game like that. Play a couple of games of each of the Tetris formats just to say, okay, I've played them. But I really have no deep insight or any skill there, and I know that there's an entire community of very skilled Tetris players that would laugh at any of my performance there. I also don't know if I have anything particularly interesting to say around Tetris, so it's probably a game I wouldn't play or make any footage on, because I would just be playing Tetris, and I don't even really have a desire to play Tetris. And I imagine that's the case for a lot of people. New Xbox Game Pass titles for console, PC, and cloud have been announced. Black Ops 6, StarCraft, StarCraft 2, South Park: The Fractured But Whole, and Dead Island 2, all coming. I also heard some speculation here that no, I don't know if I remember what I actually heard there. Seems like there might be something. Can't quite just click on this orange part. I'll have to work on that later. I heard a story somewhere that something might improve its streaming ability to the point where you could stream games that you own that aren't just on the platform. But I wasn't paying enough attention, so I don't remember the story, so just ignore me, I guess. Moving on to the Gamatsu articles. IO Interactive is going to publish a Build a Rocket Boy action-adventure game, Mind's Eye, for console and PC. Build a Rocket Boy, I assume it is the name of the company. Which, that could be something. Mind's Eye evokes the idea that you would be hacking, but the screenshots here seem to give more of a GTA style run and gun shooting feel to it. Claire Obscure Expedition 33 launches in spring of 2025, and the voice cast has been announced. Here you have several different names. I don't think I have heard anything about this game though. Claire Obscure Expedition 33. I definitely wasn't expecting it to just be a RPG fantasy game. Interesting. It's like your father's JRPG, where you have a bunch of older looking people dressed in black and really dirty and cut up. Seems like they've stunt casted celebrity faces and 3D scanned the faces, which is why everybody looks older. Except for this one, this face seems like to not really match at all. Yeah. This character looks way younger than this one does. And then, in almost contrast, this character looks way older than this one does. And this one just looks goofy. This has been the first time I have seen a game so focused on showing off who the face actors are instead of showing off the game. And it is a really ugly game to be doing that. So yeah, you can't really speculate as far as how the game will actually play, but the visuals here certainly aren't grabbing my attention in a positive way. Yeah. There's a reason inherently as to why JRPG characters are always in bright, colorful visuals. It just is more attractive on that instant glance. This just doesn't look anywhere as interesting. I almost wonder if this developer is from like a Middle Eastern country or more conservative country in general, and so they're thinking, we want to make a JRPG, but we want to make the characters have their clothing cover them up more, be more conservative, look older. There is something to be said about that picture. Let's see if we can actually get it to stay on this picture. Like this character in particular, the beard, the mustache, the long frizzly hair being covered up, it definitely screams not Japanese at the very least, where Japanese with beards practically non-existent, and usually if they do have a beard, it's a hipster goatee. And Japanese are obsessed with cleanliness, and they are obsessed with not having gore, so all the dirt and blood being shown in this screams not Japanese too. But yeah, I guess I'd have to do more research than I have time to really do to try to figure out where these guys are from. Let's see, we can click the publisher, Kepler Interactive, and the only other thing they've done is, I guess, Pacific Drive, or the only thing this publisher is otherwise published is Pacific Drive. And I'm assuming Middle Eastern, maybe they're from a Middle Eastern company, but this might straight up just be a level of a conservative company straight out of the West, out of the United States. Let's see. Moving on, Modal Debut 3, hashtag Nicola, is coming to the West on October 17th. Model, not modal. That's a funny one to misread. It's a fashion game. Let's see. I actually would be interested in just seeing what this is. We do know that the other Nikki, Infinite Nikki game is still in development. I think maybe it came out. Yeah. There is room for there to be a few more girl games or girly games. It's really more girly games now in fashion games in general. That being said, I don't think that there's really a lot of hope in what I'm being shown here. This looks like this is a dress-up game where a lot of this could just be asset flipped costumes. It does not look particularly good. The animation style is not particularly great. Yeah, and I don't know how much of a game really is even going to be here, and how much of this is just a simulation thing. One of the things about the Cardcaptor Sakura mobile game that I'm trying to get through just so I can uninstall it off my computer is that there are a few sections where you are putting on different costumes for Sakura, which is in line with the anime, and that she was constantly being given different costumes to wear. They are magical girl costume type high fashion nonsense, not realistic fashion outfits like is being shown here, for however much of these are actually even realistic. And so there is a mini game where you have to mix and match different outfits to get higher scores, but that's as far as it goes, and I'm not sure this game even goes that far. And so I just watched that whole trailer, and it's just not looking like it's anything other than a mix and match dress up simulator, and that there's not any kind of currency you get for doing fashion shoots that would unlock new outfits or anything like that. The funny thing here is, if there was a big enough audience and somebody actually cared, fabric texture in like the Unreal Engine could be really realistic and cool looking. You could have a actual fashion game where you're sewing together different fabrics and cutting holes into it and tearing and sewing and putting elements to it, and then it could actually flow. It would probably take way more work than it would ever sell for, but if you did do the work around that, costumes also would look, that kind of work could be reused in other games to make costumes look better in your average first-person shooter type game, where most outfits are armor that is just glued on to the player, or leotards that is just glued on to the player. still a lot of clipping of costumes in games. Although I haven't played a lot of recent games to know if that's improved, it almost certainly hasn't. Moving on, the Rogue Flight game launches October 25th. It's an 80s and 90s anime-inspired space hunt arcade space combat game. The funny thing is, every time I reference something and call it an anime from the 80s or 90s, I think to myself whether I'm actually referring to 80s and 90s anime, or am I talking really about 2000s, 2010s era anime? Because it really is just a blur. Okay. Now this catches my attention because what this looks like to me is something like a Star Fox game, which I've never really been able to find an on-rails third-person space shooter game. So the anime style here actually doesn't catch my attention anywhere as much as the gameplay did, which is a good thing. The issue though is I still kind of have a higher desire that if I was going to play a game like this, it would have multiple paths like Star Fox, because I found that fairly interesting. And then they're naming quite a few people's voice actors with pedigree, people working on in English voice actors who worked on Fallout 76, Overwatch, League of Legends, and Marvel Avengers is not that really impressive, but then Japanese talents from people who have worked on Neon Genesis Evangelion, Gundam, Sailor Moon, Naruto, and One Piece, although it's possible that these voice actors were characters that got one line in each of those. They definitely are showing a desire to tie it back to 80s and 90s anime. Astrobot's first 5 speedrun levels again launch October 17th. Komatsu just saying the same thing. The Resident Evil 4 remake sales have topped 8 million. The milestone that was achieved in 19 months. Here we have a interesting fan art design being shown here. I guess that we can officially say at this point, we could have said it probably, let's see, 13 months ago really, that there's not going to be any more controversies or issues with Resident Evil 4. It is the game that it is as far as RE4 remake. The things that were changed seemingly not so offensive that they cause any real issue. Yeah, I just realized as my alarm's going off I actually have more time than I thought I did because of schedules changing. So I actually don't know when I'm supposed to be somewhere. Come and think of it, oh well, I'll figure it out. Somebody will call me, I'm sure. So yeah, the RE4 games go fine, went fine. Now the question is, now that we are 19 months away from the Resident Evil 4 remake release, we are really 5 months short of a potential RE5 being re-released, in my mind, and only in my mind. I would think you should re-release a new game every 2 years. If it actually would be 4 years between an RE4 and RE5 remake, then that's just going to be a higher demand on whatever RE5 remake is, assuming they're even actually going to release an RE5 remake. The other option would be to in 5 months just released a new Resident Evil game in the series of the latest numbered games and continue to push the story forward. Monster Hunter Wilds showcase is set for October 23rd. Corpse Party 2 Darkness Distortion has been delayed to 2025. I think that's a visual novel. The Famitsu review scores for issue 1870 are out. They're giving The Bridge Curse 2 the Extrication 29 out of 40. Card and Cell 32 out of 40. EA Sports FC 25 32 out of 40. Outer Wilds Archaeologist Edition 29 out of 40. That's pretty low. Romance of the Three Kingdoms 8 Remake 33 out of 40. I guess these Romance of the Three Kingdom games still popular. And then Super Mario Party Jamboree for Switch getting 36 out of 40. 9s across the board. So they're very happy about that. And they found once again a way to sell some more Mario Party. Valkyria Phantasm launches October 18th. And yeah, I was trying to figure out why this game in particular didn't have a Steam link that was clicked on, but I'm noticing it actually doesn't have a Steam link to click on, so alright. Urban Myth Dissolution Center launches February 13th, 2025. This too feels like it is a visual novel. It looks weird. Kind of an odd pixely art style, though that won't inherently mean that I hate it. So there's a prologue. There's a trailer 2, so let's watch trailer 2 and see if we can get a general idea of what's going on. Yep. So these would be more than likely more Japanese focused urban myths. So a Western player playing this game may not really relate to a lot of these stories. Yeah, seems like it's mostly text-based with a lot of cutscenes, potentially. But yeah, there might be something to that. Episodic digital mystery adventure is how they're describing it. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 details post-launch content plans. Check out Komatsu if you want to get the details there. All in Abyss Judge the Fake limited time demo is now available. This is a poker battle mastery adventure RPG. There might be something into that that catches my attention. There in the past has been a desire for me to find a poker game that doesn't have microtransactions or on Steam. This may add a story element to it also, and a cheating element to it also, so that you won't just lose. So, in the same way that Honey Pop was an adult dating game, where you're dating and sleeping with, eventually sleeping with characters, but to get to that point you had to play a match 3 game. This looks like this is a visual novel story, but to get through the story you have to play poker, which might mean the story is very short. But it certainly has caught my attention. So maybe if it gets reviewed well, I would get it and play it, if it even comes out in English. Although it is also possible that it is a game that is decent but will just not be given a chance by most people. And the company is called Why So Serious Incorporated. Interesting. We already talked about the PlayStation Concert World Tour a little bit. There's a full list here of locations, most of which, none of which actually seem like they are in North America. Game Pass adds Call of Duty Black Ops 6, StarCraft 1, StarCraft 2, and more in late October. We are increasingly seeing, I think, the last few dying breaths of the Battle.net launcher and the idea that Activision Blizzard games have to be played through the Battle.net launcher. That being said, I don't think we are at a point where the StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2 are on Steam. I think I would have heard about that and would have wanted to play them if they were on Steam. Of course, if I go back and try and play StarCraft 1, it's going to be a very rough game. And if I try and play StarCraft 2, it might have been updated a lot since I last played it 20-30 years ago. So it's probably changed a bit too. That being said, G Protein, moving on to the next story, G Proton 9-16 has been released with mod support for various Bethesda games. So if you're into modding Bethesda games on Linux or the Steam Deck, this would make it easier. It's a community build of Proton, having nothing to do with the official Proton from Valve. But yeah, if the work is being done with one, it seems like the work would probably be doable with the other. Rogue Legacy 1 has released its source code, which might lead to something, although maybe not too much. Rogue Legacy 1 is a fine game and all, but don't think we would see several Rogue Legacy clones coming out using this source code in 4 to 5 years, but maybe we will. It's not a bad idea though to release source code and let game developers get better and share their programming ability. It also isn't probably that dangerous for them to release 10-year-old source code for a game, although maybe that hurts any copyright claims that they would try to make if they're releasing publicly source code. It probably should be a level of you're revoking any copyright claims if you release the source code to public, but inherently there are ways it seems like you can release the source code and still claim copyright, which seems like a crazy thing to do, because then if anybody looks at the source code and makes anything that's even substantially similar to your source code and is copyrighted, they are going to be considered guilty of copyright infringement. You can be considered guilty of copyright infringement in the United States even if you never saw the source code and you just make something that is quote-unquote defined as substantially similar. Intel and AMD have joined up to form an x86 ecosystem advisory group to shape the future. So that's probably something that should have happened decades ago, but AMD and Intel have been fighting each other, putting in little bits of code that then the other competitor has to either try to emulate or come up with their own thing. I think SSX for Intel chips was one of those subsets of programming codes that AMD just didn't have. And for a very long time, it was almost impossible to recommend AMD CPUs, and only recently, with the Threadrippers, has it become a case where AMD is slightly better or at least cheaper. Of course, this could also be an advisory group that meets once a year and then says very little and does very little. That happens too. They've also pulled in Linus Torvalds, not Torvalds, and Tim Sweeney from Epic Games, along with other companies such as Broadcom, Dell, Google, HP. These are mostly the manufacturers. Now, noticeably, all of these companies have their own ideas and go in their different directions, and have long histories of not really staying to a standard or agreeing towards a standard. Linus Torvalds, perhaps. Maybe an exception there. And as far as the hardware manufacturers or major software players, Valve is not included in this list. Whereas Valve, being right next to Microsoft, probably would be very helpful as far as shaping where the future of x86 instruction sets should go. And I'm not sure really where it should go. I wouldn't be surprised if they spend their first meeting mostly talking about AI and nonsense like that. Let's see, they're planning to come together to find new ways to expand the x86 ecosystem with intended outcomes to be enhancing customer choice and compatibility across hardware and software while accelerating the ability to benefit from new cutting-edge features. That's very generic. Simplifying the architectural guidelines to enhance software consistency and standardizing interfaces across x86 product offerings from Intel and AMD. There definitely is a room for improvement in that the next motherboard standard really should be compatible with the next AMD and Intel CPUs. It's crazy that you have to buy either an Intel CPU or an AMD CPU, and whatever you buy there is going to then determine what kind of motherboards you can buy. And it's even worse in the server space because then there's two more standards. So there's at minimum 4 different standards as far as the types of motherboards you can buy just to put a CPU in it, when the connectors and everything should be very standardized there. It certainly would make building and swapping out parts way better if that was the case. And then Microsoft is going to push for, I think, more security. And in a one funny way, all of these companies probably are being forced to do this right now, because if they don't get together and create something fairly interesting, they're going to have a hard time selling new hardware and software. Microsoft in particular is going to have a hard time selling Windows 11 and Windows 12 to a future generation, as they have very little that appeals to computer users. Then they also want to enable greater and more efficient integrations of new capabilities in operating systems, frameworks, and applications. We're talking a lot about software here, when the hardware is perhaps the first thing they need to address. Now, Red Hat, Enterprise Linux, and Oracle are going to probably be more focused on enterprise hardware, whereas Microsoft is going to be focused on Windows. Meta, I don't even know why they're actually involved. Lenovo, HP, Hewlett Packard, Enterprise, Dell, and maybe Broadcom are all going to be focused on selling hardware. Google's going to be focused on Google stuff. Broadcom is probably going to be focused on their chipsets that they sell, sound cards and internet controllers and chips like that are on motherboards. Linus Torvalds is going to be focused on Linux. So they're going to have a lot of hurdles just figuring out how to get on the same page and agree to anything with so many different things. Here's the article I was talking about earlier. Valve is waiting on a generational leap for Steam Deck 2, but it's coming. It's important to us, and we've tried to be really clear, we are not doing the yearly cadence. We're not going to do a bump every year. There's no reason to do that. And honestly, from our perspective, that's kind of not really fair to your customers to come out with something so soon that's only incrementally better. So we really want to wait for a generational leap in compute, which would actually be CPU, if we take that literally, without sacrificing battery life, before we ship the real second generation of Steam Deck. Now notice he said the real second generation. That doesn't inherently mean there might not come out with a tweaked version of the Steam Deck, but it's something that we're really excited about and working on. So yeah, their target from that quote seems to be very much that Valve is waiting for a CPU that can go faster with the same amount of wattage that it's using, so battery time is not affected. And yeah, I really wish I had played my Steam Deck more to really speak to that, as far as how much battery time do you really need. But yeah, can't really speak to it. It seems like a brand new device has a decent amount of battery on the OLED version, but also haven't been playing games, so maybe the battery usage just gets way smaller once you start running more demanding gaming requirements. Battery life is an issue, certainly, and in everything, and it's a shame we haven't figured out a way to shove little nuclear reactors into devices that would just last forever. I suppose you could probably make some kind of mod for the Steam Deck where it was a battery pack that you would swap batteries in and out, but I doubt they'd ever officially do anything like that. It also certainly is worth pointing out that Valve made these comments as they were just now getting around to having a way to ship and sell the products in Australia, which in fairness it is difficult to get physically to Australia. It is very far away. Like Australia is as far away from Japan as Hawaii is from Japan. That's just how incredibly far away it is from pretty much anywhere. So if they are now getting to that point, it very likely might be a year from now, next October, that they maybe start to release a new Steam Deck. But also, maybe the prices would just go down. It wouldn't be a terrible thought either if they just started to reduce the price. Moving on, the survival game Valheim has added new feast mechanic and the Bog Witch in testing. All three Szymanski brothers are working on a chaotic Harry Potter inspired game. I don't know who these are. Szymanski, I've never heard that name before. Let's see. They worked on games like Dusk, My Friendly Neighborhood, and others. They're now making a what looks like a low polygon Harry Potter type of game. Secret Agent Wizard Boy. This is probably a great example of a fairly high quality Linux game, Linux first game. It is running on Python, no, Proton. That makes a lot more sense than Python. But yeah, to get back to the point I was trying to make, this looks like a fairly high quality Linux game, but Linux first games tend not to look that good. And that is definitely a problem you have to deal with when you're making a game this Linux first. And then you just don't have that big of an audience. Even if the Steam Deck becomes incredibly successful, it's still not likely to push Linux first games, Linux games that are not listed on Steam much. Those kinds of games are not going to sell and not going to be made as much. Let's see. Tenebri Somnia looks awesome, blending live action cutscenes and retro horror. So you have these kinds of point and click pixely images, and then they're throwing in live action horror sequences. I'm a little surprised there hasn't been more of this kind of stuff before, in that somebody shoots a bunch of footage, they think they're going to make a horror movie or something like that, but then the movie footage is just not good enough to be cut into a movie and shoved out on some kind of streaming servers. So then you would commission a video game to use those cutscenes, that footage as cutscenes. I imagine the connections are just not there. If you're a movie maker working with a production company, the production company probably doesn't have any kind of connection to video game developers or video publishers. Also, it might still be the case that shoving out a game onto a streaming service, even at cutscenes, even little 5-minute vignettes on particularly horror, you could shove those out as a anthology series and collect those as an anthology every Halloween. And I've seen several anthology movies where it's just 5-minute cut shots and scenes. But yeah, that probably does make you more money to do it that way. This is an intriguing game, though. Let's see, check it out on Steam. Now, noticeably, the Steam links are not being opened from Gaming on Linux. I don't think I had ever programmed it to do that, so I need to throw in that programming. This is also certainly a different twist on a live action game where there is always been this weirdness in live action games in when they actually wanted the player to interact. Usually you just get like a prompt to click on a dialogue choice, and then a new next bit of video plays. Here, by bringing it down to some simple point and click adventure pixely visuals, you let the player control the character and do more. Alright, well, I'll leave it at that, but that certainly did catch my attention. In fact, that's probably the most interesting game I've seen in a while. Let's see, be careful with pachinko roguelike billionaire, as it may suck away your entire next week. Here's another game that looks like it is a pachinko style game. This one is a Godot engine game. Yeah. Again, I'm very happy I decided to include and add gaming on Linux as a news source, because these games are things I'm not seeing as far as I can tell. Maybe I would have seen them later on. And they are games that are not being talked about by other people. Fractured Alliance gives off some real classic Command and Conquer vibes. Some of these games also, though, maybe things that are just being announced really early. Although, me making YouTube shorts about games that are announced very early is exactly what I want to do. I think we've officially hit the point now where you can start uploading 3-minute YouTube shorts, so I should experiment with that a little bit and see how much that does, or how much that works. Let's see, the props fight back against humans in Puropu Defense Squad. A lot of these may also be from the Steam Next Fest, as far as things. It's very possible that last stream my macro didn't open up all the new games. It's very possible that my new macros aren't opening up all the new games anyways. So there was this announcement that a junk store for Steam Deck had a Steam page that was added. It's a special plugin for the Steam Deck that would bring Good Old Games and Epic Games compatibility unofficially. Well, that page has now been taken down and disappeared. But yeah, that didn't seem like that was really going to happen. Junk store developers posted on Reddit that it was Valve who took it down. It was taken down not due to the Epic Game or Good Old Game features, but specifically because it modifies Steam itself, which I guess is not allowed. Which, yeah, I guess that makes sense that they'd have a blanket, you can't modify Steam itself, and they don't have to go into any deeper details that financially they have no desire to integrate Good Old Games or Epic Games into their Steam launcher, or let somebody else do that. If Valve was going to do that for the Steam Deck in particular, they would do it themselves. It probably wouldn't hurt them too much if they did do that. It would also be a great way to fight off any kind of antitrust claim if all of a sudden Valve's launcher, the Steam launcher, integrated good old games and Epic Games, giving the similar, if not the exact same experience for those games too. Let's see. Building a retro Linux gaming computer, part 44, The Legend of Kobo. Return to part 1, dumpster diving. This apparently is some kind of long-running article series. Really do wish Gaming on Gaming on Linux had more screenshots though, just a little bit more flash to their pages. It is a little too bland. Also noticing that there's a black bar here I should deal with. The Steam Next Fest October 2024 edition is now live with lots of demos. Might have some older stories here that we've already covered. Yeah, we had already talked about Daily Dungeon. And I think we had already talked about this Humble Bundle. And we've already talked about OBS Studio Beta, bringing in some new features. Not particularly interesting features to me though. Talked about this one. It might be a case that I am never going to really be able to program Gaming on Linux to not open up some of the older stories. And usually I think the trade-off there is that I'm either going to I'm not going to ever open page 2 of their links, but it probably won't matter because they won't have that many new news stories that they would get down to page 2. I could probably curate so that this page in particular, the reminder that it needs your support, gets closed automatically. And then, yeah. Let's quickly go through GameDeveloper.com, and then I'm going to take a bit of a break. And then we'll go through all the games. Some of these stories, 2 or older, as far as hackers have hit Pokemon developer Game Freak, exposing troves of sensitive data. I heard from Tech Tips, YouTube channel, Linus Tech Tips, that some of the data allegedly that has been leaked is adult porn fan fiction by the Game Freak's content creator, involving Pokemon breeding with humans. Although at some point I wouldn't be surprised if it would be straight on the up and up and official that Game Freaks just keeps a collection of all adult porn that they can find involving Pokemon, so that they can put a cease and desist out to anybody that gets too popular. Last thing I imagine Pokemon's developer wants is for a super hyper popular doujinshi, is what it would be called, doujin, to come out and be just so easy to stumble across for little kids that it becomes a problem. The whole what was it called, Elsagate on YouTube, was very much that case, where there was just inappropriate pornish like versions of Elsa videos being flooding YouTube. But yeah, on the other hand, if that's actually not true and that content actually isn't in the content that was hacked, it's a genius 5D chess move on the part of the hackers to imply that it is in there, because then Game Freaks would have to admit that yes, that is our data and it has been stolen, and they probably don't want to admit to having ever owned or created that data if they actually created it themselves. I haven't heard anything, speaking of Pokemon, about the new anime, so I'd assume it's doing fine and little kids are watching it, but I don't think that there's a huge amount of new fans that would pop up wanting to start over fresh with a whole new art style and a whole new heroes. I haven't seen any merchandising or like excitement from the new characters. NetEase and Bungie reveal a free-to-play mobile Destiny spin-off game called Destiny Ryzen. Let's see. Is it a first-person shooter? It's a mobile shooter. That's what they're saying, so I assume that's first-person. Rare alum Craig Duncan has been appointed to the Xbox Game Studios head. At the end of November, Duncan is going to oversee Xbox's first-party developers, including Halo Studios, the Coalition, and more. Although inherently, I don't know how much authority he really has over a lot of the acquired companies. Technically, since Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard and ZeniMax, those would be first-party developers, so he should be in charge of them, but I'm not sure that's really the case. I also saw a story that one of the developers at Bethesda said that they couldn't switch engines because if they went to something like the Unreal Engine to make their next Bethesda game, it just wouldn't feel like a Bethesda game. Which at a certain point, that's kind of the whole point, is that people are no longer willing to tolerate Bethesda games in the creation engine because they are buggy and not up to modern standards as far as the visuals and the performance out of them. Let's see. Creating dozens of unique pixel worlds for UFO 50. Yep, this is a more promotional interview story. Here's the story I talked about before. There's a report that Bandai Namco is cutting its workforce and canceling several titles. 2 games have purportedly been shelved, with almost 100 staff being pressured into resignation, which is a very uniquely Japanese thing instead of laying them off. See, Bloomberg reports pressuring up to 200 employees to resign. It goes from 100 to 200. Let's see, there are several projects seemingly have been put on hold, including both a One Piece and Dragon Ball title. Oh, 100 of those employees have already resigned. Microsoft has settled the antitrust lawsuit contesting Activision Blizzard's acquisition. The Xbox maker puts in a lawsuit aiming to stop its purchase to bed. Interesting that this has not been reported more, and I wonder if this is only one small settlement in several of the cases. Let's see. I think this is the California lawsuit, not the FTC lawsuit. I don't think they're going to be able to settle the FTC lawsuit. Yeah. And inherently, this may very well just be a case that California got some money in the settlement and that's all they really wanted. Yeah. This lawsuit is 10 players who lived in California, New Mexico, and New Jersey filed a private consumer lawsuit against Xbox. So this is not even the big California lawsuit against the state of California. I'm not sure that that lawsuit even exists. So, you know, no wonder nobody reported on this, because this is just a tiny settlement and it doesn't really matter. The SAG-AFTRA performers and game devs to reignite negotiation next week. They will re-enter discussions with major studios like Formosa, Disney, WB Games starting October 23rd. Riot Games lays off staff to solve challenges and build for the future. Every time there's a screenshot, it's always Jinx up front. And then here there's the incorrect older story that he was going to retire after Fantasian's console launch, which has not been updated. Okay. So, I'm going to take a little bit of a bathroom break. It probably won't be too long. I have a whole bunch of missions here. And then I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. One of the things, I was picking up boxes, just way too many packages got delivered today. From a lot of it's from the remodeling, and I'm really doing this whole cycle of purchasing things so I know I have them now, that I might actually send things back. Although once I have something, I do have this tendency to never really send things back. But yeah, one thing that I would want to impress to all people out there, new people, young people, first time home buyers, or first time just moving out of the protection of having your parents pay for everything for you, is that you pretty much need to assume that in every 10-year period there's going to be at least one multiple thousands of dollars disaster happening there. Some of that, theoretically, if you're renting, might not fall on you, but very often you'll have scumbag landlords who just won't repair things, and if it really needs to be fixed, you might get painted into a corner of actually fixing it. The trick often there is that you have a scumbag landlord that's refusing to fix something, and then you just move to a different place, and then even that is going to cost you money to move. But yeah, I'm not even going to do this. I'm just trying to see if I can get a few bits of gems before I run out completely. But very often landlords will only repair things in the intermediate between the last person renting and the new person that they're going to have replace that person. And usually when they repair things, they do it on the cheap, and they're just trying to surface level make it look good, to then rent to a new person at almost certainly a higher renting amount of money. And so you eliminate a lot of the scumbag landlord things, but you don't eliminate the overall things that water heaters, air conditioners, just building damage, storm damage, all of which will probably happen. At least one of those things will happen in a 10-year period. And you might get very unlucky, and it might be that you have a disastrous 10-year thing happen, and then another disastrous thing will happen right after that. It often will feel like it's just piling up. A lot of it is because you either pay to maintain things and things still might break. You're just hoping that it won't be as big of a deal. Or a lot of times people just don't maintain things. It's kind of hard to maintain a water heater, and it's just as easy to let them break after 10 years and be replaced. I recently found out that even the electrical meters on the outside of houses only last about 5 to 10 years, and they secretly are just replaced every now and then. Let's go through all the new games on Steam while I'm rambling here. It's no coincidence that the laws, at least last time I heard about them as far as bankruptcy in the United States, are once every 7 years, which is to say you could probably go bankrupt more often than once every 7 years, but your credit is expunged from credit reporting bureaus. Any bankruptcy is expunged from being reported after 7 years, theoretically. Who knows what they secretly are telling each other or keeping on the record books. Pancake Patrol. Nah. Now I'll give it a chance. But yeah, they didn't just pick that number out of random air. They either picked it up directly from the Old Testament concept, which probably picked it up from that being about the average time that somebody needs their debts forgiven because something horrible that they really couldn't have never saved up for or didn't plan for. And yet the victims will often get blamed in those cases, and if you don't have something in front of you and you just don't know what the horrible thing is, it's hard to live in that fear and not just live in naive bliss otherwise. It's much more mentally appealing to live in naive bliss and just assume nothing bad will ever happen. This is a free-to-play game. Interesting, it's just a free-to-play game. If it had reviews, I'd give it the time. It's kind of one of those examples where this deep black art might look rather good in print, but tends not to translate particularly well to screens and monitors that have backlit LCDs. Like, this kind of art looks really good if you're reading it printed on paper in a manga with the sun behind you lighting it. That being said, this is also an art style that's just got way too much black in it. You're approaching a black paper background with white ink instead of a white paper background with black ink style, which that's how the Batman the Animated Series was animated. It was black paper with colored inks on top of it. I guess I'll give this a chance. What is this? Really? It's not really a video game, is it? It's funny, it only supports English and Russian. And it's kind of funny that there even is a tag called web publishing. So this doesn't really look like it's even what you typically would describe as a visual novel. The rest of the things under web publishing here are animation software. Yeah. Well, yeah, I didn't think that there was a thriving, let's take something that looks like a comic book and put it on Steam. Yeah. And it being English and Russian makes me wonder very much if that's a Russian company that's trying to get past the laws that say Russian, Valve, and English United States companies cannot do business with Russian companies. Anything that says it's a non-game. The general suggestion, to get back to my ramble, is to have at least 6 months of your salary saved, which is a reasonable goal, but it's not a goal that many people actually accomplish, I'll have to admit. And it probably doesn't really get to the core of the point there. Yes, theoretically you should save up as much cash as possible, but most people live to the extent of their comfort and will just spend more money on either small things here and there. Because the pressure is off, people just stop watching their budget as much as they might. They go out to eat one more time per week, and it just feels all very natural and not like a big deal. So my suggestions personally, and maybe this is the wrong suggestion, is to maintain things with more of a paranoid desire to just say, I'm servicing this thing when it really needs to be serviced. I'm not putting it off. I'm changing air filters in AC more than you might actually think is necessary. Some of it, unfortunately, a lot of things, and as far as home ownership is all built around homeowners insurance for those disasters. Whereas if you could get away with paying off a house and not having homeowners insurance, that's probably the money you're paying for the insurance. It would be better off invested into a high yield savings account. Would be, I guess, your best bet there. Like, when you really run the numbers, that would be what you do. You would not pay any insurance at all for house or car. Legally, you probably can't do that, but I know a lot of people do. And then you would take any money you're saving from that and putting it in a high yield savings account. And then when the disasters happen, you're hoping you have enough money to cover it. Of course, you're definitely gambling there that if the house ever gets totaled or your car ever gets totaled, you would have saved up enough to justify doing that, because that's usually where insurance is still somewhat useful, is if a house completely gets totaled and is not worth anything. New World Eternium here is already mixed. It's not getting received well at all. But yeah, insurance is effectively a scam. People take your money. The insurance companies take your money, put it in their high yield savings accounts, and then will underpay any payout for any claim, or will not pay at all for many claims. And if you actually want to get the proper amount from an insurance company, then you have to pay for lawyers to sue them, which, if you're going to end up in a lawsuit, you might as well have just driven without insurance in the first place, and then sued anybody that crashed into your car. Of course, that doesn't cover if you crash your car into a tree in that case. Buy cheap-ish is my suggestion for cars. Buy fairly high quality is my suggestion for houses. Houses you generally don't want to swap, although most people's lifestyles do have them moving around and skipping around houses several times throughout their life, and not just staying in the same place like you might have done in the past. Mostly negative. Just gonna say no to that. I still have way too many YouTube shorts already. But yeah. These days, despite the problems with Uber, having yourself Ubered to places is becoming more and more viable. That is, assuming you're not going to school or work on a daily basis via car. If you can walk to work, if you can walk to school, if you can commute in any way, if you can carpool to work, then yes, you are hitting a point there where you really don't need to own your own car. In the United States in particular, though, there's still a lot of scenarios where you do need a car. A lot of places where there aren't good commuting options, and Uber is not gonna cover that. Yeah, Uber is really only viable if you work from home or if you're retired or something like that. Alright, well, I'm going to end the ramble there since we're at the end of the stream. Not particularly anything impressive in the new games coming out on Steam. So there still is this bigger divide between what is coming out right now on Steam and what is getting press releases and announcements for coming out in the future. And that does spell for a poor Christmas season, but we kind of already knew that was going to happen. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.